I wanted to just to recap some of the instances, some of the experiences that I've had over the years with some of the subtle realm stuff, dowsing or otherwise, and we'll talk a little bit about why in a sec before we go into some of these little stories about things. One of the things is that this channel has got a lot of dowsers. We talk a lot about dowsing. One of the reasons that we talk about dowsing is, as I said, and most of you will know, is that dowsing is just the most practical way to start to really get into working with your subjective experience of reality and really starting to exercise the sort of neural pathways that allow you to really expand that experience. I mean, the other way of doing it, of course, is to take some mind-altering drugs, but we don't go into that, and I'm not recommending that whatsoever. But once you start to explore your subjective experience of reality, then you will find, because you are paying more attention to it and you're exercising different neural pathways in the brain, that you actually, your experience of the reality in which you live starts to shift, usually nice and gently. Now, sometimes it happens the other way around, and sometimes the shift starts to occur, and then the individual actually finds something like dowsing as a way to actually start to connect with it and make sense of their world that they're in. All of this stuff, this shift of energy and the opening up of the neural pathways and sensitivity to the subjective realm often happens to people, and people find peak experiences within it during times of stress. So this whole process of the global lockdown and the virus shenanigans will have put quite a lot of people into that highly stressed state. So to me, it's no surprise that the wave of people waking up, as it were, or becoming more and more aware of this sort of stuff is ever increasing. I think one of the reasons why I'm not reluctant, but reticent to sort of share stories too much about my personal experiences is that it becomes a bit like it's just me, and what I'm trying to do actually is to help you guys. The absolute key thing in all of this is that if I experience something in one particular way, it doesn't mean to say that you're going to experience it in the same way at all. We don't want to go too far down the way that we all experience life differently in our three-dimensional senses, but obviously that difference that does occur at that level is amplified when we start to talk about the subtle realms, because we're diving into that quantum realm of possibility. So anything is in theory possible. It's just our limiting beliefs that limit what it is that we may come into contact with. So when I started learning mediumship, which would have been a good 10 years after I had encountered Jane, the spirit of the deceased person that was living in our house, who started me on this journey. It was a good 10 years of me just dowsing and chatting to Jane about life, the universe and everything, and a whole bunch of sort of basic self-development process going on in that time. And it wasn't like, I thought that suddenly the world was massively different. What was a surprise to me was that I'd never realized all of this aspect of the world existed or was open to people, to me, up till that point. Now, it was 1998 when we moved into the house on the Welsh borders, and it was fairly soon after we moved in that we first encountered Jane, the spirit of the lady. And I was going to say that, having mentioned that most often spiritual development or psychic incursions, shall we say, occur when people are under stress, I did have a point fairly soon after moving in, but I can't remember whether it was before or after I actually encountered Jane, where I lost, overnight, I suddenly lost 80% of my business as a self-employed video and conference maker. Just because one client, because I had most of my business was with one client. I did a lot of work, different work for them. and that client suddenly announced that they were closing their field force. So any contractors like me suddenly overnight lost the work. So as you can imagine, as a self-employed person, that was quite a shock. So that put quite a amount of stress on me at the time to provide other income and find new clients. It also gave me a huge amount of time. It gave me time to spend in conversation with Jane. So this is why the two instances were very closely linked together. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that I spent a good amount of time just having those conversations and dowsing. And then in 2010, when Hamish died, I met Adrian Ingleton-Webber. And really, that was the time when I decided that I really should get involved 100% in the spiritual way of looking at life and tell more people about what dowsing was about. And I thought at the time what I would be doing would be telling people about earth energy in particular, just earth energy. Little did I know. So at that time, so having met Adrian, he was running several workshops and that sort of thing. And I started looking at mediumship workshops. And those are, that's how I started to develop the mediumship side of my experience of relating to the world around me. I hadn't really set out to explore in great detail any relationship with a specific guide. But things went along the route where there was clearly a guide that wanted to speak to me, and therefore I thought, well, that'll be interesting to follow that. So I just followed the flow, right? Now, what I'm getting at is, as I was doing various exercises, I was opening up a lot about how, I was opening up a lot in the ways that I was able to relate to the world around me. And I was going through a lot of healing. And one of the first things that I became aware of being able to detect or to sort of see. Now, when we say see, quite often people do relate to this in a similar way to me, which is that you tend to see something in your mind's eye, but you also get a feeling of it at the same time. So when we say I was able to see XYZ, and it's actually sort of an internal viewing, but also a feeling coming through at the same point. I will, if you remind me, I will mention one particular event that I did see things actually out here in this external reality, but I'll talk about that in a second. So apart from a very, very strong impression over the years of what Jane might look like, we spent 10 years talking to her. When my guide was when I was trying to connect more strongly with my guide, and before I got to the stage of actually feeling his presence, allowing, eventually into a trance type state, what came through the quickest was that sometimes at sacred sites, and I was doing a lot of work at Avebury at this time, I would become aware of little beings, probably about that high. What's that? About 4 feet, 4.5 feet, something like that. And they were the classic greys. That's all I could say, Oh yeah, that's the one. Yeah, Full Monty Boykin. That is the video where he first spoke through me, where I first said his words, Merlin, that I later started to recognize and call Merthin. That's the first time that he spoke through me, and he only spoke for a couple of sentences. But the feeling in that instance was like, actually, it was like being plugged into the mains. That's the only way of describing it. If you've ever had an electric shock and you get the bzzz, the intense, I mean, obviously on alternating current, it should be a throbbing, but this was like DC. This was like just being suddenly plugged in, because this energy, his energy, had come in here into my body, into my space, because I had asked him to at the stage. and spoke. And so this, in this sense, this is rather typical of what happens with the human body in any of these major events, and it's rather similar to the first hit. Now, I'll caveat this, it's rather similar, I've been told, to the first hit of a very strong drug, like a class A drug, heroin or something like that, I believe, where you get a major hit the first time, and then that's what causes the addiction, because then the person using the drug is always trying to get back to that first hit. So I do not, and never have, tried heroin. But with that, that link to Merlin and the Merlin energy coming through and being present in the body, I've never had his presence so strong like that. But the caveat about that is, because I do tell you not to ask, or do not ever let any energy do what I've just described, right? I had been going through a process of learning, and I'll go back to the story about the little greys in a minute, but I had been going through a very strict learning and understanding what this energy was before I allowed him to do that. And in that video, that energy moving in there to speak was, I knew it was him. But even so, after the event, I still had like 1% doubt going, that really wasn't a good idea. But the reason that we say don't do it is because we do not know what level of energy each individual is functioning at. And what we do not want is, you don't invite anything into your energy. It's as simple as that. Until you know for sure, 100% or 99.9%, as in my case, what that energy is. Because as soon as you invite something in, you are literally doing that classic old horror story thing of, well, do come into my house. And you're not then in control of your power. And the whole point about all of the teaching, or all of what we talk about on this channel, is to enable you to be in control of your power and to understand where your boundaries are. So I'm coming back round to greys in a minute. I was on that training path, learning more and more about Merlin, learning more and more about the guide that was with me that wanted to make contact, learning more and more to allow what comes naturally for many people, allow it to come to me, and allow me to open up to experience some of the subtle realms that were there. And the first thing that I saw were these little guys. And the first time I saw them, which was hilarious, because you're thinking, yes, it was at Avebury. No, it wasn't. It wasn't Avebury. It was actually in the hallway of my house. Which immediately, I was basically we had quite a large hallway. It's quite wide. It was about 6 foot wide and probably a good 15 feet long. It was an old Georgian townhouse. So, it was a house of substance. So there was a lot of space. And I stood at the one end of the hall and thought, that's a bit odd. What's that? And as I sort of just allowed stuff to come more into my awareness, there were about 3 or 4 little characters, these little greys, sort of walking around. They weren't walking around with a lot of intention, it has to be said. They weren't bumping into each other, but they were just sort of milling, like waiting to do something. And I do remember that actually one of them did turn and look at me, and it just sort of looked, because obviously these faces, I couldn't tell you in detail what it looked like. Really, I really couldn't. But these faces didn't. I've never seen really any expression on them. It's rather like, and this is where it gets all a bit corny. It's rather like, I think I mentioned it before. I might have mentioned it last week. Stargate SG-1, the American TV series. There's Asgard on there, little grey things wandering around. That's what it was like. So that thing just looked at me, but it didn't register anything. It didn't do anything. But as it looked at me, I was like, oh, hang on, don't like, and it all went, it all disappeared again. Soon after that, I went to Avebury and we had a group session there. And we actually, I think I'm right in saying that we did a little ceremony. There were about half a dozen of us in the Dowsing group. We did a little ceremony in the quarter that, I don't know the names of the quarters, but you know how those of you that have been to Avebury, you'll know how it's sort of split into four. The road goes through the middle. It's the corner that is down towards the Avebury shop. We were doing this ceremony, the half a dozen of us or so, we were doing this ceremony one evening. And it involved, we had just decided that it was a natural thing to sort of spread out a little bit. And we were in sort of a bit of a semicircle, the six of us, quite a big gap between us. And we were just tuning into the site. And Avebury is an amazing sacred site. I mean, it's a really big deal. It's far more impressive than Stonehenge's, really. And that's partly because it hasn't had all the non-aware energies going through it, Stonehenge having been closed down anyway, really energetically for some time. So I became very aware after a couple of minutes doing this ceremony that there were others in the non-physical realm that were with us. And they were again, in that instance, I'm sure that this is where we had the three different types. There was the little greys, there was tall, thin greys, not excessively tall. For those of you that have seen the Close Encounters movie, at the end of that, there's a really tall, lanky grey. It wasn't as tall as that, but there was just taller than me, a couple of those. But there was also really big, heavy ET stuff, which was, they were like, the only way I can describe it is that they were like rhinoceroses in armor. And that immediately springs to mind things out of Doctor Who and stuff like this, right? Or actually, for those of you that on the British TV, if you've been watching his Dark Materials, the Philip Pullman dramatisation, these were like rhino equivalents of the fighting polar bears. But anyway, they were very vague impressions. Very vague impressions. And as we were standing around in the semicircle with these spaces between us, that's where the ETs, these three different types, were standing between. So they were forming a row. It wasn't a complete circle. It wasn't anything like that. And it wasn't like a terribly impressive ceremony we were doing. We were literally just tuning in, all of us, all six of us or so. I would love to be able to say that something amazing happened and there was a flash of light and there was blah-de-blah and so happened. No, nothing happened. Nothing happened. We all just simply stood there and there were these energies that were present in those three types. And when the human beings finished the ceremony, we were chatting about it, as you do when you've done a meditation or something. And my memory is that every one of us actually had the similar experience of being joined by different ET energies. So now these are people that I trust. These are not people that are just sort of blagging it just to join in with the fun. It was a group hallucination, if you want to call it that. And I use that expression in the same way as we would regard reality as a group hallucination. It's only the fact that we all agree on the rules of what we live in as human beings that we don't call it a hallucination. This was a similar thing, but everybody basically saw the little greys, the tall greys, and the rhinoceros type character. So there was a presence. On one of the visits to Avebury, we did establish that way back in the history of Avebury, when it was first created, there was a link to Neptune. There was a huge amount of energy going from and to Neptune from Avebury, and it still was there. There was still a link there. The greys, the little greys, I've always felt, and this is only felt, I haven't asked, I haven't explored, I haven't doused, I haven't looked into it with any great degree of depth, but I've always felt they were interdimensional. So to me, it's like, and this is why I think that they were present, or they seem to be present in my hallway, was that it was interdimensional. They are living their own life on their own, if we want to call it a globe, in place, in their own sphere. And it's just that the perceptions are merging and changing. But look, you know, we're just that point of awareness. So that point of awareness is just slipping between the veils. So to me, yeah, the little ones, the little greys, always feel interdimensional. The big rhino-y type things, they felt more like they travelled somewhere. The big grey thing, I've got no idea. No idea. The energy of these ET beings was very different to elementals. So to elves, fairies, these ET beings were far more solid and in a way present. The fairies and elves that I've seen, which are smaller, to me they're about 2 feet max, and they're far more playful and childlike and fluffy, light-footed is a way that I would describe it, and flowing and in a group, more like spider's web, cobweb, but alive in a place, than these ET separate things. When I saw these two things, and there were other instances where I saw the little greys, again at Avebury, and again they weren't doing anything, they were like hanging around. But I said to my teacher, the teacher that was helping me with the mediumship, look, this is what I'm seeing. And she simply said, it's up to you what you choose to acknowledge and what you choose to accept into your reality. And she's absolutely right. And actually, because I wanted to be tuning into my guide, this presence that was becoming more and more powerful, if you like, more present, I was accepting of that, of him, rather than saying, right, I want to dive into ET and discover, you know, and explore all of that. And to be honest, I asked my mediumship teacher about the ET stuff, because I said, you know, I said something like, look, I'm seeing all these ETs everywhere. Am I crazy? Is that what you'd expect me to, you know, to see? Would you expect this to happen? And that's when she said, what you accept into your reality is up to you. And this is part of the thing, is that it's all about the possibility of everything being present. There certainly are a lot of people, there are a lot of tales of people, and I don't dismiss any of them, of people having ET contact. And in fact, we have ET contact as one of the section headings on the house healing form, so that we try to work with that sort of trauma. So Voikin and I were having a chat last week, and Voikin was sharing some of his knowledge of the Seth channelings, which are very, very interesting. And we'll talk more about Seth in due course, and I'm going to put a video up because Voikin has great knowledge about Seth. But one of the things that Voikin Fulmonty raised in that conversation was the fact that Seth has talked in the past about the moment. And we've talked here about the moment, the power of the moment. You know, it's all old Eckhart Tolle stuff and all this. But when you look at it from the spiritual perspective and with the background of what we just talked about, it brings a slightly new nuance to the understanding of what it means to live in the moment. Because one of the experiences I had at Avebury with Merlin, with my guide, when I got to that stage of actually being able to listen to him, talk to him, and follow his instruction, because literally it was him talking to me, saying, go over there, or anyway, I'll tell you about some driving experiences if I have time in a minute. But this is the one I want to share with you, which is, there is now what do they call it? The main big stones at Avebury. There's one of them set like that. There's another one set like this. And the Michael and Mary lines both go through it. Do they call it the Cove? No, I think that's a different part of, I see my memory's going. I think that's a different part of it. But there's the main stones, huge things, 15 feet high, these big standing stones. And for those of you that know Avebury, the pub is over there, right? Not that the pub is my focus, but anyway, we crossed the road, and I just decided that intuitively I felt like standing with my back to this big stone. And as I stood with my back to this big stone, my guide came in. He came in and was like, yes. And the sun was starting to go down, so it was quite a lovely summer's evening, classic thing. And there's trees on the horizon. It was really peaceful. There wasn't that many people around, a few cars going by. And he told me to relax. And at that time, that was a perfectly ordinary thing, because I was doing a lot of work with him at home, and we would always go into deep meditation, and I would listen to him and wait for him and feel his presence. And he told me to relax, and then he said, I'm going to take you away. I'm going to take you away for a moment. I can't remember his exact words, but it was something like, I'm going to take you away for a moment. And I thought, what does he mean? Where am I going? Am I going to disappear? Am I going to dissolve away? And he said, don't be alarmed. It will be just a moment. And so I just stood there, and I just chilled and sort of tried to just relax as deeply as I could. He didn't say much more. And then he said, thank you. That's all, something like that. And I said, but you haven't done anything. Because I was just still looking at the birds flying across, and the sun's just gently moved down. And he said, yes, I have. But you haven't done anything. He said, and in a meditation about a week later or so, and in fact, I'll try and dig it out, because I used to do a lot of meditations and channel them through and record them and then put them on as blogs. And there is one where I'm sure he talks about the fact that he took me away for a moment, but the moment is so infinitesimally small, I did not even notice, didn't even register it, didn't notice that I'd gone and come back. So you say, well, what's the significance of that? Well, the significance of that is exactly what we've talked about before. When we have discussed here on this channel about the importance of the moment and the fact that we are not what we appear to be, that the world is not what it seems. And those are his words, constantly repeated every time he finished with a session with me for over a year. The world is not what it seems. Farewell. It was always the way he ended. And the point is that we are that point of awareness that chops and changes and slides across an infinite number of possibilities that are presented to us in each moment, which is a nanosecond of a moment. It could be anywhere. That's what he was showing me. That's what he was illustrating. That's what he was trying to highlight and point out. Because you can't just say to somebody, I could say to you, that the world is not what it seems, that we are a point of awareness, and that you don't really exist. And you won't, but you're going to go, oh yeah, so, and how, what, have you gone nuts? How do you prove that? Prove it. You can't prove it, because we are what we are. And saying it doesn't allow the message and the significance of something to sink in. It's the learning that occurs when you experience the experience of it. And what I mean is that I can't express even when I was just standing there watching the sun and birds flying, that there was still a deep sacred energy to what meditation afterwards, and he was explaining it again. A very wasn't just like, oh yeah, by the way, you nipped off another dimension for a nanosecond there. How was it? It wasn't that sort of thing. Now, there are instances, of course, where you probably would have heard about these, read about these from other people. I've not experienced this, where you take, you're in this dimension. Hang on, you're in this dimension. This is our physical dimension. And then your awareness will slip into another dimension, another time, another place. And your whole awareness can slip over into that experience. And that's what you're asking about, Benjamin plus 10. That's what you're experiencing, talking about, sorry. Now, in the Spirit of the Serpent, which is the video that I first did with Hamish Miller, there's a lady in that called Julie Soskin. She's a sensitive. She was born a sensitive. She once was tuning into the earth and actually slipped into an experience where she was in a prisoner of war camp, Second World War prisoner of war camp. In fact, it was one of the concentration camps. And she literally had, I believe it to be day after day, experience of living in that camp as basically a different person, but her awareness was fully and utterly in that camp. And she doesn't talk about it in the Spirit of the Serpent, but I think I have it on video. Again, you see, this archive footage on that. If I can, I'll try and dig that out. But so all of her awareness from this dimension went into that dimension, into that experience, and she was in there for a long period of time, wondering, in fact, how the heck to get out. So she still had an awareness that she was in this body, in this place, not her body, not her place. She was still an aspect of Julie Soskin, but she was experiencing life in the prison camp, in that dimension. She got back again, clearly. Yeah, I was saying about my dad, that's right. He talked about the fact that somebody, I don't know whether he knew them or whether it was just a story that he'd read, where they were walking along the Kent or the Sussex Downs in the south of England, and they suddenly found themselves in a battle, and they could sniff it, they could feel it, they could hear it. They were amidst of the battle. They were basically, there was a woman that had shifted into a man's body, was standing there with a sword, blah, momentary, and then back again. But shocking enough as it was. But the concept of the moment is really a valuable one, because actually, you know how if you have a bad day, you think, oh, well, tomorrow's another day. And you wake up in the morning, you think, oh, yes, today's going to be a better day. Well, actually, every single moment you can change that energy to avoid it being a bad day, because each one is different as we slip from one moment into the next. And this is why quantum healing was popular a little while ago, where they were saying, well, you take a quantum leap, you quantum jump from one aspect into the next. Well, actually, that's exactly what you're doing, because if you become aware that you can change, you think, well, no, you can change. You can take conscious control of all aspects. Sometimes we choose not to, even out of spite, to spite ourselves. We enjoy feeling grumpy and angry. Again, with the moment of that choice of your reality, because really we're fed material, and then it's our choice. So we're fed energy. Energy is the more appropriate word. Material? Yeah, it is material, because things happen. So the energy creates the material world that we encounter and we deal with.